Hi, I'm Tommy, and I'm a professional paleontologist. By day, I use the latest data science techniques to reconstruct ecological and evolutionary changes from the fossil record. But by night, I investigate cryptids, the paranormal, mediumship, the occult, politics, history, philosophy, and even God himself. You know, all the things that good little scientists are supposed to avoid. If you want to join me on my journey, friend, be so kind as to like and subscribe. And welcome to Creepy Puppets Presents. Hey folks, so it's Shark Week 2021, and also I filmed a new intro for my videos that omits the line about cryptids, despite my never having actually done a video on cryptids before. So before I swap this intro for that one, I decided it was time to make my first video on cryptids. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 5 popular cryptids and rank them according to their biological plausibility, from the most ridiculous cryptids to the most plausible cryptids. Now, I know in some of my videos I might come off as anti-science, and because of that, you might think, well, obviously I believe in all of these cryptids because I'm anti-science. But I'm not as anti-science as I sometimes seem. I just want people to be as skeptical about science as they are about everything else. No special pleading. And I don't want science to be weaponized against religious minorities. And it's just that, as a religious minority myself, that stuff, those points tend to get hit more often than the science positive stuff. But today, I'm gonna put aside my personal issues and don my professional paleontologist hat and talk about something actually related to my job. So, what is a cryptid? Well, the conventional definition is an organism that is speculated to exist, usually through appearance in folklore, but hasn't been demonstrated to exist to the standards of the scientific establishment. Now, I've heard some entities referred to as cryptids that are clearly paranormal in nature, like the Wendigo. Or they're creatures from modern fiction, like the idea of the living megalodon. So I'm going to exclude everything that isn't supposed to be an animal, and only those which are presented in traditional folklore will count. The study of cryptids is called cryptozoology. Now, most people call cryptozoology a, quote, pseudoscience, but that strikes me as ridiculous. There are many examples of biologists using indigenous knowledge to identify and describe new species to science. My personal favorite example comes from one of my favorite novels, Moby Dick. So in that book, the characters spot a giant squid, and it's portrayed as a real grounded animal and not a monster. And we're told where you find giant squid, you find sperm whales. Now, Moby Dick was written in 1851, before giant squids were described by real science, and well before the prey relationship between giant squid and sperm whales were established. Speaking as someone with a foot in the theoretical biology world, we can also use folklore as the basis for modeling questions about concrete biology. In fact, we'll discuss an example of that in just a few minutes. I have a whole video arguing that pseudoscience is a social construction, and I think cryptozoology is one of those places where that is the most clear. Finally, regarding the megalodon, because it is Shark Week after all, and that's the biggest shark-like monster, that is getting its own episode, so it won't be on this list right now. Okay, prologue is over. Let's get into this. Number 5, the Ropen. The Ropen is a pterosaur hailing from Papua New Guinea. It's said to be an enormous pterosaur with an equally enormous tail, which also happens to be a bioluminescent scavenger. Do I have to explain what's wrong with that? Everything? Okay, fine. An animal with a tail as big as that could never fly. Bioluminescence has never been observed in terrestrial vertebrates. At least the ground scavenging thing isn't completely off base, as Witton and Naish 2008 note that azhdarchid pterosaurs, which include the giant Quetzalcoatlus, were opportunists and would have taken scavenged meals if they could get them, but couldn't have fed exclusively on carrion. Also, this story is deeply tied in with the creationist movement. I linked to TREY the Explainer's video on the topic for more, but its physics-breaking anatomy is a deal-breaker for me. Number 4. Mokele Mbembe. So this is another cryptid popular with the creationists. Mokele Mbembe is a swamp-dwelling sauropod dinosaur supposedly swimming in the Congo River. The main problem with this critter is that it's based on outdated models of sauropods as swimming giants, or giants who would walk on swamp and lake beds. We now know sauropods lived fully on land, and in fact they wouldn't have been able to breathe if their bodies were underwater with just their heads sticking out. So this is another cryptid debunked by physically impossible anatomy. The reason I ranked this higher than the Ropen, sightings of this creature, particularly by Westerners who may not know what they're doing in the Congo, especially maybe 100 years ago, is that this cryptid is likely based on a real animal, most likely based on the critically endangered African forest elephant. Number 3, Champ, or really any of the supposed Plesiosaur-like sea monsters or lake monsters. But I picked Champ, the monster supposedly dwelling in Lake Champlain on the New York-Vermont border, over a monster like Nessie because, one, it's American, and so am I, and also because I've actually been to Lake Champlain. There are two major problems with these plesiosaur-type lake monsters. You need to feed a breeding population of them, which obviously varies, lake to lake, but is generally implausible for most of these lakes. And plesiosaurs were air breathers, so they would have to come to the surface so often that they would be seen all the time. I rate lake monsters higher than Mokele Mbembe because even though we have no reason to believe that either sauropods or plesiosaurs survive to the present day, plesiosaurs at least have a physically possible anatomy and behavior. And as many have noted, lake monsters have numerous known animal explanations, including eels, seals, and Greenland sharks in some cases. Number 2, Bigfoot. So this is the cryptid I have the most to say about. And it's the first cryptid on the list that I think is narrowly more likely to exist than not. Though my number 1 choice is even more plausible in my view. We all know what Bigfoot is. I'm not going to give him my usual introduction. What I mostly want to talk about here is a 2009 study of Bigfoot conducted by Lozier, Aniello, and Hickerson, and I apologize if I butchered those names. The authors of this study used Bigfoot sightings to run a niche analysis, also known as a habitat distribution analysis, to calculate the habitat distribution for Bigfoot. The authors conclude that Bigfoot is more likely than not a black bear. Now, first observe that these are authors engaging in cryptozoology, and that these authors are doing real biology based on folklore. It seems that they're only, not called pseudoscientists because they arrive at conclusions that the scientific establishment approves of, which is the unreality of Bigfoot. This is broadly consistent with what we generally see in that what gets labeled pseudoscience is what the scientific establishment does not approve of. You can see my lecture at LIPS 2020 for more on that, where I go through the whole argument that pseudoscience is just a social construction. Now, if you've watched me for long enough, you know that I have worked extensively with habitat distribution analyses for my master's degree. So I'm something of an expert in the field of theoretical ecology and the space in which this paper lives. So how does this paper stack up? Well, like the notorious Carlson paper on astrology, this paper is so terrible that I suspect it would not have been published if it weren't supporting the establishment conclusion. First, it's partly satirical. I don't tend to think that any scientific paper should be satirical. But secondly, and more importantly, the authors do not attempt to curate the sightings that are potentially bears. I mean, they do a little bit of this, but not in a real rigorous way. And what do I mean by that? Look, I concede that most of the sightings attributed to Bigfoot are actually bears. But if Bigfoot exists, it's not unreasonable to think that bear-supporting habitat would also overlap with Bigfoot-supporting habitat. What I would do is sort of look at traits that are associated with Bigfoot sightings that are not associated with bear sightings, and maybe are associated with primate sightings, and curate those so that you pick the Bigfoot sightings that are least likely to be bears and run your simulations off of that. In general, a large undiscovered primate, potentially hominin, is entirely plausible, giving the advantage of intelligence and a small number in remote locations. I'm not convinced of Bigfoot's existence, But if Bigfoot's discovery were announced tomorrow, I wouldn't be surprised by it. And I know a lot of my colleagues in the paleontology community have told me the same thing, at least off the record. Of all the cryptids, Bigfoot would surprise them the least. And our number one choice, the Lusca. The Lusca, or shark octopus, is a figure from Bahamian folklore. The Lusca is a large octopus said to be dwelling in the blue holes, also known as cenotes, of the Caribbean. These deep underwater caverns have been seldom explored, and there have been several unexplained deaths and disappearances in these cave systems that have been attributed to the Lusca. Descriptions of the size of the Lusca range from hundreds of feet long to around the size of a giant Pacific octopus, which would still be larger than any species known in those waters like the Caribbean reef octopus. Not that giant cephalopods don't live in these waters, as giant squid and bigfin squid are both known to live in nearby waters. Even if we discount the more extreme size descriptions, an undiscovered species of octopus, approximately the size of a giant Pacific octopus, living in the limestone cave systems of the Caribbean, is completely biologically plausible, and it's the only cryptid on this list that I actively believe is real. Alright, thanks for watching, folks, and the next time you see a video, it will have a shiny new introduction. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.